Здравейте, драги зрители! Coming off of the heated, fiery delving from last time, today we will be letting the air out. What comes in, however, is a whole different matter entirely. Per fan request, my attention was brought to the rancid, slobbering, suffocatingly decaying bog of the lore's deeps, in search for one of the most striking inhabitants of the Warhammer 40k galaxy, Plague Marines. With no specific growth to latch on, I had to sift through all of the pungent refuse for crafting materials. It was a mildly challenging accomplishment to find a literary itch, as trust me, there are plenty of actual itches there, since all in all, the most pungent of Nurgle's mortal followers have received a significant volume of exploration and chances to display their goods. Fortunately, or, well, I guess unfortunately for those interested in it, if you scoop deeper, you come across a minor little tantalizing detail that has not been fully harvested. Consider, what are the core aspects of Dear Grandfather? Stagnant, inescapable entropy? So evident it quite literally oozes off of his beloved family. The festering of virulent ailments, diseases, and parasites. Nothing really new, as his followers love spreading those in search of his favor or simply for their own benefit. We have to dig a little deeper. Did you pick up on it yet? Yes. Like the cosmic pole-proportioned dendrophiles can attest via their goddess, one of Nurgle's true core aspects is love. To clarify, I'm not referring to anything romantic. Wouldn't want to inconvenience his wife. Love for all life in existence, for in the end, it is all eventually headed for a finale in his garden. Don't mind the fire, they're working on it. Despite it being such a cornerstone of his influence, we barely ever see anyone, other than the measly bottom-rung cultist trying to spread expand the family on the ground level, show affection to those they seek to spread Grandfather's word to. Especially when it comes to the Plague Marines, who oftentimes retain their enhanced human superiority complexes and look down on the masses with a tinge of disgust, seeing them as little better than fodder. If they are truly as devoted to Nurgle as they claim, that could be considered rather uncharacteristic of them. Until you take a moment to recall who is most commonly associated with this particular brand of Astartes. When it comes to them, callous disregard for the common people is very much so in character. But what if we changed the perspective on the matter? Particularly to one that has been documented to exist in the lore, despite some people's protests to its existence. Hidden from the greater setting's view, outshined by the more bombastic elements of the setting. With this appetizing creation, I intend to shine more light on it, likely much to its distaste, given that light is the best disinfectant. Alas, discontent aside, I believe some exposure will do it good and, more importantly, will be to your delight. Take a deep gulp and dive along with me for this gem in the muck.
Emperor, please forgive me, Theo helplessly screamed in his mind as he dreaded to open his mouth for more air than his body needed to continue running. He was a run-of-the-mill menial, exalted among his kind merely by having the skill to drive a truck. Thanks to it, he had work, predominantly ferrying cargo and men around. Business was not luxuriously rewarded, but it was enough to sustain his family. They lived humbly, less so out of necessity and more so out of love. For both him and his wife Jana, the greatest treasure they were blessed with was their daughter Inga. Good, spirited, but cursed to be born blind. They did not think less of her for it, but he knew that both of them were sad that she would have to grow up without seeing their faces. Hence why the couple agreed to only live with what they must, setting all other earnings they could make aside until they saved up enough to afford ocular augmetics for the ray of sunshine in their life. It was a comforting thought. Theo would struggle, but through it his most cherished Inga would have a significantly better life. With each passing day, his piety declined in favor of devotion to his daughter, as he resolved himself to do anything for her. Today would be the first time he would question said conviction. A lifetime contract to serve as the Imperial Guard. Such a notice of high-paying opportunity should have been a blessing to receive, were it not for the hell that was unleashed upon their hive, which implied to him that it would be a very short venture. At first, countless diseases began to spread through the population like a tide. Not long after, the sun would be blotted out not by pollution, but deafening clouds of vile insects, crawling into the ventilation pipes, water systems, and whatever flesh they could find. All governmental and clerical bodies struggled to stem the rotting apocalypse, until the world itself gave up, and the ill turned on the ones trying to heal them. Cleansing and extermination campaigns were swiftly implemented, and for a while seemed to work, but in a scant few weeks, it was the dead's turn to stand up in defiance to Imperial authority. Walking corpses, shambling mutated monstrosities, and horrors streaking in the most fetid, smoke-choked recesses of the hive began to dominate the surface. Every single one more disgusting and wretched than the last, different in every aspect, except a single constant. Those hideous, twistedly jubilant grins plastered on whatever resembled a face on them, and their unceasing raspy laughter that would drown out the streets, along with the impotent gunfire levied at them. Somehow, be it through renewed faith or fatherly conviction, Theo would persevere in his duties, up to the day when he encountered them. Vaguely bearing the shape of the Emperor's angels made him believe that they were true manifested demons. Bloated, lumbering, and utterly deformed, barely holding some kind of humanoid structure, encased in rancid, rusting armor, with decaying flesh and various bodily fluids leaking from its seams. Contrasting the rest of the grotesque hordes, these monsters were quiet, deathly so, and even more lethal. Almost gliding among their lesser allies, ignoring wounds that would have obliterated even the likes of a fully grown Grox, and methodically applying weaponry of terrifying destructive power. Worst of all, however, was the supposed revelation that they were the source of all of the maladies inflicted on the populace, as everything, from the air to the permacrete, would be corrupted into a sickly, decayed state around them. In the rare cases where they were not armed with ranged weaponry, he had learned from all of the guardsmen succumbing to dread that 50 paces was the last safe place one could be from them. With but a single step past that distance, affliction would strike at the gear and bodies of those misfortunate enough to face them. The unit he was servicing was meant to occupy a choke between the hive levels and not allow any of the infected or their shepherds to pass through. It would be the final test for Theo's steel as he drove to the barricade's front and saw one of the silent demons whose glowing blood-red eyes seemingly bored into his very soul as it advanced against them. Two sickly globules, ejected from a weapon he could not recognize, brought the menial out of his frozen state, firstly with their glow, and then with the screams of the guardsmen they struck, who were melted through by them. In an instant he tried to reverse his struck with no success. A single cough escaping his lungs enlightened him that the creature was past the 50 paces. Consumed by horrid ice, Theo burst out of the driver's cabin, sparing only a glance to see the machine's head already beginning to suffer visible corruption, and the suffering of the far braver men that stood their ground before fully turning in a mad sprint away. By the valor of those braver men and women, the lower districts of the hive, where his home was located, had remained untainted thus far, and by what could only be a miracle, he was able to find his precious family cowering, but unharmed, when his legs finally made it there.
Theo!
His wife exclaimed in shock.
What is happening?
Jean, the things have broken through the line, he cried through his panic. We have to get to the trams and evacuate.
Baba, what do you mean? What's going on?
Inga worriedly queried, not understanding the sudden rush and fear in her parents' tone. Her voice stunned the man for several heartbeats as he turned to look at her. For the first time he was thankful that she could not see him, for nothing short of pure dread oozed off of him as he lied. "Everything will be fine, treasure. Just make sure to follow your mother and not let go." Speculating purely off of her features, Theo believed that she did not believe him, but still trusted her father as she followed Jana, hands locked together, without any further fuss or protest. Both of them ran out in a hurry, into the maze of streets and back alleys that led down the hive and towards the tram systems. Before their patriarch could follow, he momentarily looked around to ensure their safe getaway, his blood freezing him solid for a sliver of time as he saw it. Those same red eyes, looming several stories of walkways above his domicile and boring straight into his soul, while reality around them rotted away. In the instant he could control his limbs again, the man fled the scene and rejoined his family. The limited amount of oxygen their lungs could extract from the thick air, which grew more and more damp with each breath, carried them further down. No explanation had been needed, as would only enhance the pressure that tried to suffocate them. Minute relief would sprinkle over the girls' parents' faces when they saw the elevator, which led to the bottom levels. All of it was expelled, almost joined by their bowels, when a man raggedly burst out from a nearby alley exit. Clanging and crashing of some manner of refuse or other miscellaneous items to the ground heralded the man's shambling entrance. The family's screams welcomed him. Getting past the initial jump scare allowed the pair to get a better look at the man. Immediately strangling their attention was his guard uniform, followed by the Aquila-bearing las pistol he had shakily raised in their direction, before collapsing forward. Next to be noticed was that his skin had turned a disgusting shade of purple, with half of his face having swollen sickly growths covering it. Evidently more of his body was affected, particularly the grip on his weapon being rather loose, since in the moment he connected with the ground, it fell out of his grasp and slid an arm's length away.
Mama, Papa, who is there? Why do they sound like they're hurt?
Inga questioned on the verge of tears, whilst listening to the stranger's groans as he tried to crawl towards them. Theo shared a brief glance at Jana, judging by her expression that both of them must have thought the same thing at that instant. Forcing their visages to turn more stone-like, and the mutual nod that followed all but confirmed that to him.
Just close your ears, precious, and come along. We have to get the elevator ready for Papa to join us.
Briefly hesitant, the girl eventually nodded in compliance herself and put her hands over her ears, allowing her mother's tender touch to guide her away from whatever was happening. Over the course of their egress, Theo carefully approached the squirming person, picked up his last pistol, and pointed it back at its former owner's face. The way he held it mirrored that of how the weapon was waved at his family, with two key differences. His hands shook slightly more than the ill one, but his grip was decisively stronger. The same could not be said for his nerves, which were visible on his grimace as he just held it and did nothing. As a divine push to action, the guardsman looked up into his eyes, struggling to wheeze out through his deformed features.
Please, kill me.
His breathing accelerated, heavy gusts trying to break past Theo's gritted teeth as he attempted to force himself to pull the trigger. This indecisiveness would only last several heartbeats, before the menial lowered the last pistol and stepped back. "I'm sorry," he whined out, turning around and running away, leaving the unfortunate wretch to haplessly outstretch a hand after him, all the while continuing to stifle tears and coughing. I'm sorry. Concern met him from the pain of his wife's face as he rejoined and embraced both her and their daughter. Not questioning his whimpers, they simply returned the gesture, allowing his heart momentary respite. In that instance, he breathed out, calming himself, and stood up, closing the gate of the elevator and engaging the controls of the descent. As the machine roused itself to life and began to sink, Jana continued to comfort Inga. Conceding to the string of guilt that tugged at his honor, Theo spared one last glance at the struggling man who could do nothing else but writhe. For the rest of his loyal existence, he would curse and regret doing so, because turning the corner of where his family had come from strode out the now obviously colossal form of the decrepit demon he had seen spying on the trio's escape. backing to the other side of the elevator, further startling the women. Their patriarch's breath began gaining speed once again. He couldn't even dare to think what that thing would do to him, only becoming subsumed by unsettling confusion as the brave man he had doomed's pained moans slowly turned to laughter that echoed after them. Immediately when the jaws of the contraption released them, they continued their run. Close. They were so close to the tram station. A few mere blocks past the refinery hub were all that stood between them and safety. Or so the parents thought, until their progress was halted by a figure that made Theo question whether it, or the demon following them, was more terrifying. One of the Sisters of Battle from the Hive's temple was blocking the catwalk leading to the next building segment. Stern, cold and imposing, she nearly crushed them through the grate with her evidently disgusted glare, enhanced by the bolter clasped in her armored hands.
"Who are you, and what is your business here?"
she demanded.
"No one is allowed to pass this checkpoint without clearance."
Gulping nervously, Inga's father stepped forward and tried to gain passage via his credentials. I'm Menial Theo Benalis, sister, trucker of the 93rd Platoon. Her brow raised in suspicion.
"Then why are you not with your assigned platoon?"
Her glare then narrowed at the weapon in his hand, and she asked more forcefully.
"And how did you, a mere menial, come to possess the last weapon?"
Like an injection of reactor coolant fluid, her words froze his blood, while paradoxically exhuming sweat from his face. All of the compounding duress he was being buried under prevented him from gleaming any solutions to their situation, other than honestly begging. Please, sister, I'm not a soldier. I could not help in any way when the lines broke. My daughter is blind and I could not abandon her and my wife. Please, have mercy."
"Mercy?"
she barked, causing them to stumble and fall on their backsides as she brandished her bolter at them, then continued.
"You abandoned your post, the soldiers you were honor-bound to, your emperor's given duty, for these? A spineless wench and this useless thing?"
Her weapon's click sent the girl clinging harder to her mother, who returned the gesture.
"It is no wonder this abysmal world, even the suffering it is going through, being infested by such faithless wretches. Her lost sight is your punishment for not staying strong in your faith in her gift, so she would not have to behold both of you and your planet's impiety. The only mercy you all deserve is the Emperor's mercy, so that she may never witness your vileness."
Time halted, not even to a crawl. Every single fiber of life within Theo began to launch his full body between his loved ones and the levied bolter, but it would not be faster than the sister's trigger finger. What was faster than both him and it, however, was a blinding, sickly green flash that surged right past the man's head and struck the bride of the Emperor center mass. A near-piercing scream filled the air, momentarily added to by the clang of the sister's bolter falling on the metal grate they stood upon. The family could only look and listen in horror as the Sororitas' body convulsed in agony from being melted alive by what Theo recognized as the same acidic weaponry he had run away from. In the next accelerated dozen of heartbeats, the lethal liquid seeping from her devoured the bridge segment beneath her, splitting the catwalk in two and sending the still screaming woman plummeting down to the high floor. They could still hear her for moments longer after the churning smog consumed her form, until silence returned, leaving them unsure of whether the acid had finally ended her, or the fall. Alas, they could spare her no further mind. It instead began to process the question of what had slain her, causing them to turn around and finally see the demon in its full, sickening glory. Decrepit and rusted armor, various inhuman growths protruding from it. One of its arms was instead a fleshy tendril that gingerly cradled what one might have recognized as a twisted plasma pistol, which leaked the same green ooze as did the cracks from the demon's armor. The only aspects of it that were free of filth were its burning red eyes, and a somehow gleaming white reptile's head on its left pauldron. All the while it advanced towards them, step by terrifying step. Finally getting flushed with manly spirit, Theo shot up from his crouch, took a step forward, levying the last pistol he held, and firing several shots as he yelled, Stay back! Be gone, monster! Leave us alone! Most of the fiery beams missed the imposing target, while the scant pair that actually struck it did nothing but briefly burn the sick covering its unharmed plate before it regrew. Then he would notice the barrel of the pistol begin to corrode. By sheer instinct he threw it away and retook his step back. 50 paces, the man's mind briefly recollected, as he could do nothing else but hug his family and hope for their demise to be swift. To their surprise, the demon retracted its own weapon and began to speak in a raspy voice.
You did the right thing.
49. Subconsciously, Theo noted as he began to feel his skin itch.
In you, I see the true strength of our kind.
By that point, none of them could endure without their nails scraping their now blistering flesh, which deteriorated further with the being's every subsequent step.
If only he could have retained it after all of these millennia. I still cannot understand how he could choose the despot over the people themselves.
Unraveling at a steady pace, their flesh began to melt. Not as if devoured by a substance like the one that claimed sister, but more akin to wax that then pooled together in a slurry mesh. Through it, all the three filled the space around them with their vocalized agony. Shortly after, Theo was assaulted by a realization that Inga's voice ceased its participation in their chorus. Despite the fear of seeing his little treasure dead, he opened his eyes, and whatever was left of his heart was squashed in a far deeper terror when he saw her melting form calmly looking up at the miasmic giant as if she could see it. What would this monster do now? Among every denizen of his mind's dark recesses, none matched what would happen next. Carefully, the demon lowered itself to one knee and embraced the three in a hug. Himself and Jana's screams intensified as their deconstruction accelerated, but their daughter merely smiled in an expression of awe as the man concluded.
Do not be afraid, child. None of my brethren have followed our father's mistake. I still uphold my eternal vow to protect mankind's people. With me, you will all be safe, and through me, you will know that unlike the false god who would sacrifice you for his benefit, Grandfather loves you.
No further struggle remained in his spirit. Theo could not escape, could not save his family. Thus he resigned his life. So did his wife. Confusion shot him back into consciousness. Both he and his beloved could now see that their flesh had joined as one alongside that of their daughter. Their treasure could finally see the world, could finally see them, and could finally see herself the same way they always saw her. Precious and priceless. Achieved not through supplication to an uncaring emperor, not through the torturous augmentation of the machine cult, but through the eternal love of the grandfather, which now flowed through their bodies. At long last, they understood why Inga had suddenly become so happy. How could they not join in her joy? How could they not work to share it with all those who continued to suffer across their world? In gratitude to their savior, the elated family would find fulfillment at their angel's side, helping spread the glorious word of their loving patron, finally united as one, forever.
Such a beautiful fate that surely inspired feelings of wholesomeness in you. I will admit I have a soft spot of appreciation for Space Marines with warm personalities. My intent with this delectable dish had a hidden motive, both to show the underappreciated lovingness of Nurgle, but also to bring to the surface and, hopefully, inspire you lovely viewer to look into a matter that might just be one of the most forgotten facts about the lore. Namely, that at the time of the heresy, all legions had some traitors and loyalists among them. Of course, most of the traitorous elements were cleansed from the loyalists' legion's ranks, but some were able to successfully escape and survive, such as the warband that reclaimed their legion's original name from before Vulcan's return, the Dragon Warriors. Who's to say that others could not have found refuge gardening? But that will be it for this video. Do let me know if you enjoyed it by leaving a like, as well as what topic or concept you would like to see be given a story with a comment below. If you'd like to stay tuned with future explorations of lore gems, join the mines and subscribe. With that, I wish you all a splendid rest of your day. Do viždani.